I think it's pretty fair on the Money Manziel MMA channel that I am able to be labeled as someone who is an extreme hate watcher, right? A hater of the highest order. Someone that, listen, you could have the birth of your child, you could become a mother, a father, a grandfather, you could even fucking solve the cure for cancer. I will still find a way to hate on you, right? That is not what I want to do on this channel today, right? I want to highlight the downfalls of a couple of fighters and talk about how they got here, how their legacies were kind of ruined, which, I mean, I'm still hating. But regardless, we're going to start off with some positivity before we get to that. Now, when I think of legacies that have improved with time, some of the old guys, I think of a guy like George St. Pierre right away. GSP is a guy that when he left the sport versus Johnny Hendricks, I think a lot of people felt like, wow, his legacy is going to be fucking rewritten. A lot of revisionist history will go around GSP where people will say he wasn't as good. And then he comes back 4 years later, beats Michael Bisping, and now everybody talks about GSP as arguably the greatest of all time. No debate, he's at least in the conversation. Another guy, actually, a little bit different, but who has had his legacy completely revised in a positive way post his career, has been a guy like Daniel Cormier. This is a guy who lost two back-to-back title fights at heavyweight at the end of his career. Just raise him up, cause every inch of me is perfect. And yet he has only improved in the fans' eyes. Again, a guy that was hated during the prime of his career because a lot of people sided with Jon Jones. They thought DC was the bully and Jones was the good guy. A lot of people liked Stipe more than DC. But instead, Daniel Cormier has begun to be loved more and more by MMA fans, not because of his commentary, I'll tell you that fucking much. Daniel Cormier's commentary,
I just actually got a text message.
Holy fuck, it's bad. But regardless, we need to talk about today some of the guys who ruined their legacies by the end of their career, whether it be in or out of the cage. I've got three fighters to talk about. This should take a little bit. So, ladies and gentlemen, grab a snack, grab some popcorn, go to your local 7-Eleven, put your hand in the cash register.
Go into the store right now and put your hand in the cash register for no reason.
That is your cash now. One final guy to mention, by the way, to kind of give you an idea of the guys I'm going to be talking about, Henry Cejudo might be a good honorable mention here. There's another one that you might have been clickbaited by in the title, but Henry Cejudo seems like a guy where, he hasn't ruined his legacy because people still respect Henry, and he kind of gained a lot of tough guy respect from the fans after, really gritting it out versus Peyton Talbot in a dominant loss. I know that's not the way you word it, but fucking whatever. Listen, he got dominated by Peyton Talbot. It is what it is, but a guy that came back, lost a couple of times, but the fans still support him because it's Henry Cejudo. He never really got the love he deserved. I think it was a little different. He's a guy that I think history will look back fondly on, regardless of the final losses. So let's get right into it, man. Enough fucking yapping. We're almost 3 minutes in. UFC fighters who badly hurt their legacy on the way out. Now, number one on this list, let me tell you right now, this guy is actually taking up a profession of being a plumber outside of the UFC. If you don't believe me, please look up Tyron Woodley leaks online. Some great work there. Just really, make sure, tell your 5-year-old to Google it, tell your grandfather to Google it. This is a thing you must look up to see what Tyron Woodley's been doing in retirement. Regardless, Tyron Woodley's the first guy on our list. Now, if you're a fan of MMA, if you're a fan of the UFC in specific, you know about the story of Tyron Woodley. This is a guy who had a tragic, unfortunate, and sudden kind of downward spiral in his career. If you look at the first half of Tyron Woodley's UFC tenure, and really the more dominant half of it, you're talking about, I know the Condit fight was an injury, but KO over Koscheck, KO technically versus Carlos Condit. Lost to Rory McDonald, but Rory was nasty, man. Then KO over Don Hyun Kim, beats Gastelum. It was kind of a weird situation, but he wins. Then you're talking the following names that that Tyron Woodley beats in title fights. He beats Robbie Lawler to gain the title in like 2 minutes. Actually, hold on. It almost fucking, it was UFC 201 he did it in 2 minutes and 12 seconds. Could have been some spooky numerology for those of you out there, but
your horse year has to be about money, and quite frankly, that's what I think the horse year is going to be about for most people.
Not the case. Either way, beats Robbie Lawler, beats Wonderboy Thompson. I know that their second fight was boring as fuck outside of a few cool moments, but he does lay claim to a win over Wonderboy Thompson. Additionally, he beats Damian Maia again in a very boring fight, but he did what he had to do. Damian Maia was a dangerous grappler. And ultimately he fought him the way you had to fight him. So respect. And then he puts a sudden, very, very abrupt end to the dude, I can't speak. The Darren Till hype train. There we fucking go. Darren Till, we miss you, goat. Come back to the UFC. Stop knocking out Luke Rockhold and fucking Misfits Boxing. Come back and get submitted in round 2 by a random middleweight. We miss you, brother. Regardless, this is a guy who, at the time of these performances, was seen as arguably the greatest welterweight in the world. Not only that, obviously he's the greatest in the world. You had people talking about him like he was the greatest of all time. There was an ESPN article legitimately written by Brett Okamoto, a respected guy in the space, after the Darren Till win that says, love him or hate him, Tyron Woodley cementing status as an all-time great. That isn't even all-time greatest welterweight. That is all-time great in terms of the sport. He had a bunch of defenses. You're talking about, how many did he have? He beat Wonderboy, draw versus Wonderboy, or no, I guess it was draw then win. So it was 1 defense, 2, I guess a draw counts as a defense. So 1, 2, and then beats Damian Maia 3, beats, Darren Till 4. I feel like I'm missing someone in there. But regardless, yeah, I know there was a lot of circumstances around Woodley's championship reign, but he was dominant, man. He was continuing to win over and over again. It seemed like no one was really doing the Woodley what anyone expected. And all of a sudden, it comes crumbling down to the ground very, very fast. Tyron Woodley, at every single media junket, is talking about how he's the greatest in the world. No one's going to ever beat him. He's making fucking shitty rap songs that no one cares about and that genuinely sucked. We're talking about a guy that, and Tyron Woodley, oh man, it was a tough run to end his career. You had a bunch of interim belts being made. Dana White publicly was like, fuck this dude. Like, I do not care about Tyron Woodley at all. He can fucking jump off a cliff for all I care. These are real words Dana White said. Look them up. Definitely not made up in this moment. Regardless, he then goes against Kamaru Usman, a fight where the UFC is like, listen, you can't run anymore, T. Wood. You got to face Usman. And he gets 50-44'd by Kamaru Usman. The reigning 4-time defending champion, Tyron Woodley, gets 50-44 by Usman, outstruck 141-34 in terms of significant strikes, and in total strikes is outstruck, get ready for this, 336-60. Real rough night at the office, kind of depressing to be honest with you if you watch it back. Ultimately loses the belt. He then comes back over a year later against Gilbert Burns in the peak of COVID and loses a dominant decision in which he has little to no success at any point in that fight. You're like, okay, he needs a reset. Let's get him back in there quickly versus Colby Covington. This is the fight that needs to be made. It was supposed to be made when he was a champion. Colby Covington then wins. It was dominant, but then Woodley had like a rib injury in round 5, so he was never going to win the fight, and he was continuing to be beaten down. 3 straight losses. Father Time is catching up. And then one of the worst fights of his career against Vicente Luque, where he looked gassed about 40 seconds in. They're like stumbling all around the cage. Luque eventually submits him. It was pretty sad to watch. And ultimately, Tyron Woodley retires from the UFC. Now, I say all this, right? You would assume that a guy who has this end to his career, who was like 38 years old at the time, would never fight again. He was an actor briefly. He had a music career. Not like the brightest guy in any room, but a pretty smart dude. He probably could have done like a podcast or done some commentary work. I know the UFC didn't love him, but I mean, fuck it. If Anthony Smith and Michael Chiesa are on the desk, then, Tyron Woodley can do it. He could have done a lot of stuff in the aftermath of his career. He then decided it was time to fight Jake Paul in a boxing match. Influencer/YouTuber Jake Paul, who at the time was not taken that seriously. In their first fight, Tyron Woodley rocked him. He lost a decision, though, so you're like, okay, now Woodley's done. He's going to retire. No way Woodley comes back and fights again. You'd be fucking wrong. Tyron Woodley stepped in on short notice and got flatlined in front of the entire world. It was voted the knockout of the year on Showtime. He got, literally, I can probably play it. I don't think they'll fucking clip this and copyright me. Let's play a clip real quick. It's a pretty good KO. So then Tyron Woodley went to 0-2 as a boxer. You would assume, okay, Woodley is never going to fight again. He's 40 years old. Please, Tyron, put the gloves down. Find something else to do with your life, man. Please become a coach or something. He then finally comes back on the Netflix Anthony Joshua vs. Jake Paul card and gets KO'd by 50 You heard that right. 50-year-old Anderson the Spider Silva. Man, it was a sad, sad downfall to Tyron Woodley's career. I think he kind of ruined his own legacy, not in the UFC, but more so in boxing. Tyron Woodley was a guy that was respected, regardless of his fight style, regardless of the loss to Usman or the following losses. He was always hailed as one of the top welterweights of all time. A guy that had a bunch of defenses, a legendary knockout over Robbie Lawler, another legendary one over Josh Koscheck. People always would have respected Woodley, and I think revisionist history would have worked well for him, looking back at some of his quality wins. Then to go get flatlined and really embarrass MMA versus Jake Paul, and then to be KO'd by fucking 50-year-old Anderson Silva in boxing. I don't know, man. Woodley definitely had a downturn. I do think that he ruined his legacy a little bit. There is a creepy truck driving around the parking lot, so I'm currently dealing with that. So if I get kidnapped live on camera, just know that at least it was a good run. Regardless, this will segue us into... Holy shit, this car is doing a fucking U-turn. This will segue us into the next fighter on our list. Genuinely had to move locations. I was 100% convinced I was going to be kidnapped, but listen... We are about to segue into the next fighter, and is there a better way to segue into this guy than by having him on the screen right now? Listen, our number 2 on this list is Anderson Silva. Now, this isn't an order. It is just 3 guys that I came up with in the moment and wrote down. Anderson Silva, by far to me, he's a tricky case, right? Because I think a lot of people will see me saying this in the first 20 seconds and go, what the fuck, you're a casual... You've never watched the sport a day in your life. How can you say Anderson Silva's legacy is ruined? He's one of the greatest of all time. I am not saying that. I think that if anything, Anderson Silva has actually helped his legacy after retiring from the UFC and after losing a bunch of fights to end his career. I think that the boxing and what he's done outside of the cage has redeemed himself from the embarrassment that was the final couple of fights of his career. Now, when you look at Anderson Silva, this is a guy who, in his post-career, some of the great things he's done, we're talking about a guy that beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Now listen, a lot of boxing fans were very, very happy this happened. Chavez Jr. went the distance with Canelo back in the day and has been complete dog shit ever since. Doesn't take his career seriously. I'm pretty sure that he's in a Mexican prison right now. He got deported, I know that. But shout out to you, Julio Cesar Chavez. Hope you're doing well, brother. Do not drop the soap. Regardless, when I look at a fight where, Anderson Silva also did well outside of the cage. Again, we talked about it, the Tyron Woodley fight. Dude, the fact that he was able to go in there at 50 years old in a KO, I know it wasn't clean. It was a nasty combo, but it wasn't like a stiff KO. It was just like Woodley is terrible at fighting and is wobbling around and it's over. For him to put that beating on Tyron Woodley the way he did systematically at 50 is fucking crazy to me. Anderson Silva has gained a lot of respect after the fact of his career because when he was fighting, near the end, it was some problems. Now, I will admit, I'm young. I'm a young one. And, I see the GOAT debates nowadays, and you get a guy like Lucas Tracy, the second biggest creator in MMA YouTube right now, I'm pretty sure, subscriber-wise. Lucas Tracy has him at 15 on the GOAT list. If you told anybody watching Prime Anderson Silva, after he beat Stephan Bonner, which I believe was his final win officially until the Derek Brunson fight, I know he beat Nick Diaz, but it was overturned. If you told someone who watched the final fight that he won in his prime, which is versus Stephan Bonner, and you say, listen, they're going to have this guy at 15 in about 12 years from now, you would think that someone has legitimately laced you with crack cocaine, with LSD, with acid. You think you're not in the real world. But instead, you are in the real world, and people legitimately have Anderson Silva at the 13 to 15 range. Bedtime MMA, the third biggest creator, I'm pretty sure, has him at number 13 on his GOAT list. This is how far back Anderson Silva has fallen. So to say that his legacy was not tarnished by the final years of his career is not true because we are seeing the proof in the pudding right here. Now, when you look at the dominance of Anderson Silva, holy shit, look at this. There are 2 decisions in this entire win streak when he got to the UFC. A KO to get the belt in his second ever UFC fight against Rich Franklin. He would just jump around divisions. This is a KO over Nate Marquardt, another KO over Rick Franklin. Dominated Dan Henderson. He was legitimately jumping around. That's a real thing. You will never hear about MMA fighters doing that other than maybe Conor.
It's normal.
Who were champions and just for the fuck of it wanted to go to other divisions to get fights and to stay active. It was a different time. It's not the fucking Hamzat Chimaev, I'm not going to fight ever. times. It's not going to be the Ilya, I'm done with fighting for a year stuff. We have a guy that is legitimately fighting 3 times a year, 2 times a year, all the time. And, people loved Anderson Silva for it. You're talking about a guy that front kicked Vitor Belfort in the face. He had the crazy comeback versus Chael Sonnen. This is a guy who you never would have thought would have been 15. It's kind of the point I'm trying to get across. Look at the Forrest Griffin KO. One of the most masterful combos I've ever seen in my life. The front kick to the face of Vitor Belfort, the knee to the head of Rich Franklin. No one was doing it like Anderson Silva. Until they were. This is the end of Anderson Silva's career, and this is where it was tarnished. Listen, losing to Chris Weidman back-to-back. The first one was a KO out stiff because he was playing with him. Anderson Silva loved playing with guys, and...
Oh, you nasty-ass bastard!
He's emoting on him. He's doing fucking Fortnite emotes before it's cool. Shakes his hips and shoulders a little bit, and then gets flatlined by Chris fucking Weidman. A guy that I'm pretty sure, I don't even know if he had ever had a legitimate KO before that in his career. I might be a casual, so let me know. Regardless, then he breaks his leg in the next Weidman fight. He does beat Nick Diaz, but it is overturned due to a steroid test turning positive. But Anderson Silva claimed it was Viagra. Anderson, brother, you clearly weren't looking at prime Megan Fox at that time, because if you were, you would not have had a Viagra problem. I'll tell you that much. Regardless, he then loses a fight to Michael Bisping, which, he was winning. He had the flying knee that a lot of people thought knocked Bisping out. He gets the adrenaline dump and then is not really able to recover from there. He loses to Daniel Cormier on short notice, and then finally gets a win in 2017 where he is gifted, legitimately gifted a decision against Derek Brunson. Did not win that fight, but shout out to you, Anderson. Then loses to Izzy, and then finishes his career with back-to-back KO losses. I know the Cannonier one was an injury, but it was so bad at the end of Anderson Silva's career, in fact, that Dana White was saying that he regretted letting him fight. He said before the Uriah Hall fight that he said that he told Silva he let him do it for a retirement fight, but he wishes he hadn't sent him in there. He knew Anderson was going to lose, and it was pretty depressing. If you were an old school fan that grew up during the prime of Anderson Silva and then were there to watch the Uriah Hall fight, I feel for you. That had to have been a sad fight to watch live. And then, the Cannonier injury to his leg. Anderson Silva had a rough fucking run to the end of his career, but I do believe that boxing saved it. Now, the title of the video is UFC Legends That Ruined Their career, their legacy, rather, with their final fights and kind of on their way out of the UFC, and I feel like it's fitting to have Anderson Silva here. He did save himself, but damn, was it a tough end to this guy's career. This will segue us into the final guy we are talking about. Now, these first two had a lot of losses to end their career, and that is why their legacy was ruined. This guy didn't have any losses to end his career, but it was everything he did outside of the cage that would ultimately tarnish his legacy forever in the eyes of many fans. I have Johnny Bones Jones as the third and final guy on my list of UFC fighters who tarnished their legacies by the end of their career. Now, again, a very real photo on the right, not AI generated, absolutely real. Did not edit this at all or find it on Reddit. Shout out to you, Jon Jones. Now, again, Jon Jones is a guy who in recent history, if you look at some of these YouTubers making GOAT lists, they have him as far back as 4 or 5, which is crazy, by the way. I do not agree with that. I have Jon Jones at 2 all time. But when it comes down to it, you can feel how you want about the steroids. Jon Jones fucking won fights, dude. Look at this resume. If you were to tell somebody who didn't know anything about fighting that this resume, with his only ever career loss being a DQ in a fight, he was beating a deaf guy so bad that they ended up just saying, fucking Matt Hamill, you win, basically. I know it was illegal elbows, but that's kind of what happened. This dude beats everybody. If you just look at this with zero context, no knowledge of what he did outside of the cage, you would say Jon Jones is far and away the greatest to have ever laced up gloves. However, Jon Jones, a man who head-kicked Daniel Cormier into the fucking Shadow Realm. Daniel Cormier was crying on the microphone afterwards. He was so unconscious and so out of it. I still don't know why they fucking interviewed him. Fuck Joe Rogan for doing that. Regardless, when it comes down to it, you see all of this, all the greatness, what takes away from it, even after a Gus rematch. Again, to have a Gus rematch where he dominates, it was a close war the first time between him and Gus, and a win over Daniel Cormier in a rematch that was later overturned. To have all of this, he then has a bunch of incidents that we need to talk about. He is a hit and run on a pregnant woman in a car where he injures her and flees the scene. He is stripped of the belt and suspended, where he would then fight Cormier supposedly in July of 2016 for the belt, but instead would test positive for steroids, clomiphene and letrozole, and be suspended again. And then you go to UFC 214. Finally, Jon Jones is back. Holy fuck. I can't believe it. Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier. It's the biggest rematch in history. Yeah, he KOs Cormier and then turns up positive for Turinabol. Now it was turned to a no contest. He receives a ban, and then he decides to come back against Alexander Gustafsson. I believe it was a vacant belt. I don't really understand how that worked. It must have been that Cormier vacated heavyweight, or light heavyweight rather, and then it was Gustafsson and Jon Jones there to challenge for the belt. Jon Jones would beat the hell out of Gustafsson, and then have him metabolite again show up for steroids, which would ultimately get the fight moved to Las Vegas. It would inconvenience a bunch of fighters, and could have been the reason that some guys had poor preparation during fight week for their actual fight. So Jon Jones has caused a lot of problems, not to mention him refusing to fight at UFC 151 against Chael Sonnen on short notice. This guy was not innocent in his career, and ultimately it doesn't help that he did so poorly against the modern kind of new gen, even though Anthony Smith isn't that new gen, the newer generation of guys at light heavyweight that he saw during the real prime of his career athletically. At 31 years old, 32 years old, taking Anthony Smith the distance, something that fucking Min Yang Zhang didn't have to worry about. Hell, Johnny Walker basically finished Anthony Smith. Magomed Ankalaev got him out of there early. A lot of guys finished Anthony Smith. Dominic Reyes, a guy that we'll talk about in a second. Jon Jones struggled with the modern generation of guys, and it hurt his legacy. Even within winning these fights and dominating, he beat Anthony Smith like 50-43. I think he got 2 points taken away, so it was like 48-43 or something. But Jon Jones ultimately dominated the Anthony Smith fight. No one cared because how the fuck do you go the distance with him? Thiago Santos gets a scorecard against Jon Jones, and Santos had 0 knees after the first round of the fight. Had nothing left in the tank. Goes out there, Jon Jones stands with him for 5 rounds and nearly loses his belt. And then it takes us to the most controversial of all, which we thought would be the ultimate legacy killer, which is when he robbed Dominic Reyes of a win at UFC 247. If you're a Jon Jones fan, I respect you, kind of, but you have to admit to yourself, if you rewatch that fight, you cannot score that fight 4-1 Jon Jones. There is an argument for a Jon Jones round 3. It is not a great argument. I think that Dominic Reyes clearly won the first 3 rounds and then lost the final 2. And yet Jon Jones was given a unanimous 48-47 twice and a 49-46. Still one of the worst scorecards in UFC history. Truly, truly shocking at the time. So Jon Jones is a guy that had suffered all that. He goes to heavyweight. He beats Cyril Gane, and it's like, okay, Jon Jones is back. The legacy is back on track. He then blatantly ducks Tom Aspinall. Mr. Tripod himself, and then goes on. Tom Aspinall was the interim champ for over a year, and then Jon Jones fights fucking 50-year-old Stipe Miocic in an uncompetitive fight where Stipe looks like he's 80, and is not landing significant strikes. He fucking looks like he hasn't touched he hasn't even touched a mat in God knows how long. Jon Jones ultimately wins in round 3. But leaves the UFC after completely ducking Tom Aspinall. Regardless of how you feel about Tom Aspinall as a fighter, it was clear as day that Jon Jones ran from the toughest test of his career at this point, and ultimately it tarnished his legacy. When it comes to these 3 guys, it's very different cases, but it is all the same thing. Tyron Woodley was a case of a guy where, he goes in there, dominant champion, and then boom, 4 in a row out of the UFC, gets embarrassed in boxing. We're never going to hear from him again. Anderson Silva's kind of the opposite case. Horrible losses to end his UFC tenure, so his legacy as an MMA fighter was tarnished, but he was able to rebound a little in boxing, so some respect for Anderson the Spider Silva. Unk still got it. When it comes to Jon Jones, this is a guy that continued to get in his own way in the cage, and by the end of his career, a lot of people, even though he continued to win, no longer felt as strongly about him being the GOAT of the sport. 3 different cases, but it is all the same. They tarnish their legacy at the end of their runs. And ladies and gentlemen, that will do it for the video today. I hope you all enjoyed. This is a lot of fun to put together. Listen, we're getting serious on the channel. We're corporate now. We've got money. We can't be making fucking Epstein jokes all the time. You know what I mean? But listen, we're still going to do it. I just needed a video to put out today that was a little more serious to make you respect me as a UFC commentator and YouTuber. We will be back with a tier list for UFC 324 about who has the most pressure on them in each individual fight, kind of ranking the circumstances of those fights. So I hope you look forward to that. Go vote on the poll on my post tab on YouTube. Means a lot to give me the advice about what I should be posting for you guys. So in the meantime, like, comment, and subscribe down below. It means the world to me. And yeah, boys, my TikTok is at Money Manziel MMA. I'd appreciate it if you subbed. We're almost at 1.5K, which is fucking crazy, but I'll see you all in the next one. Have a good day. Peace out, boys.